That's an uplifting passage, isn't it? Before we get into the message this morning, though, I wanted to recognize a first that happened at Bright City this week. We sent our first ever group of students to summer camp this week and just had an incredible time. It was really impactful. Some of them said it was some of the best messages they've ever heard. To try to not to take personally. But it said it was incredibly impactful, and I'm just so grateful for our team that they were willing to do that and able to do that. And I know that they are at home in comas right now, but Justin, our student pastor, Corbin Jensen, and Mari Taylor were the ones that led that trip, and so just deeply grateful. So can we give them a hand, and the students? I know that camp for me as a kid was incredibly transformative, and so it's awesome to be able to do that now for our students. Well, this morning we are continuing the series we kicked off last week, Summer in the Sand. And one of the things that I mentioned last week as we got started is that we're talking about a different kind of sand than you normally think about in the summer. And as I was preparing this week, I kind of had this funny image that came to mind that I was thinking about as it pertains to this message and the sand that we typically think about. I was thinking about all of the songs about sinking your toes into the sand. And, thinking this image of setting up a lawn chair in the desert with your bathing suit and your sunglasses on and your little drink with an umbrella in it and laying back, looking out, and all you see is desert. Not quite as a relaxing idea, right? It's not the same unless there's a body of water out there to look at. But we're doing this series, and we're talking about this kind of sand, this desert sand, these times in the wilderness, because I think all of us resonate with that idea of a wilderness at some point in our lives. That we go through seasons where it's just desert in every direction, that we are wandering in the wilderness. And so throughout the series, we're going to look at different people's stories as they traveled through the wilderness. And the good news is, as difficult as these seasons can be, Scripture has a lot of good things to say about it. Before we jump into this week's topic, though, I wanted to kind of recap last week just so that everybody is on the same page as I introduced the series. And there were 4 things that I wanted you to know about the wilderness. 4 key things for you to remember as we go through this series. The first one of those is that the wilderness is a place of profound disorientation. It is a place where it just feels like your world turned upside down. It is a new reality where you have to learn all over again how to operate. But we also talked about how the wilderness was a place where we learn that God really is our only hope. In a place of a desert, you learn that really the only thing you have to depend on is God. And so in the wilderness, we learn when everything else is stripped away, God is really our only hope. The wilderness is a place of intense intimacy with God. Because God is all we have to depend on, we clutch to Him all the more because He is the only thing that we have to depend on. And so it's this place of intense intimacy with God. And then lastly, it is a place of defining moments in our faith. That often in those moments where all we have to depend on is God, we see God show up in ways that we would not see Him show up any other time. And so it can be this place of defining a moment in our faith. Well, this morning, one of the things that I want to acknowledge about last week's message and the things that I listed is that coming out of last week's message, we can kind of develop this romanticized view of the wilderness. This place where we go and it's just me and God, and it's this place of profound transformation and intimacy with God, and I see Him do incredible things. But the truth is, the wilderness is still a difficult and painful place to live. It is a difficult place to exist. And so this week I want to ask the really honest question. I think the question that we all ask when we're in the wilderness long enough. And that is, what happens when we grow weary of wandering in the wilderness? What happens to us? What happens to our faith? Maybe you have been in a season of wilderness and you've grown weary there. Maybe this is the reason that ultimately you rejected God and walked away from faith. Is it just felt like, okay, God, what's the point of me trying if you're not even going to deliver me out of this? And so what happens when we grow weary? The second question I want to ask this morning is, why does it matter that we continue to follow God? Why do we continue on if we just continue wandering in the wilderness? And then lastly, how can we remain resilient in the wilderness? So those are the three questions I want us to wrestle with this morning. I want to read our passage again in Numbers chapter 11, just to kind of get us ready for this conversation. Picking up in verse 10, Moses heard the people, family after family, weeping at the entrance of their tents. The Lord was very angry. Moses was also provoked. Everybody's upset. Everybody's on edge. Moses asked the Lord, "Why have you brought so much trouble on your servant? Why are you angry with me? And why do you burden me with all these people?" And then Moses almost gets a little bit sarcastic. "Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth so you could tell me, carry them at your breast as a nursing mother carries a baby to the land that you swore to give their ancestors? Where can I get meat to give all these people? For they are weeping to me, 'Give us meat to eat.' I can't carry all these people by myself. They are too much for me. If you are going to treat me like this, please kill me right now if I have found favor with you, and don't let me see my misery anymore." A part of what this passage captures is just the sheer exhaustion of wandering in the wilderness, the weariness. Moses isn't, I would be more at the place of like, "God, if I found favor with you, will you help me with this? Will you lighten my load?" But Moses is like, "If there's any grace in you, please just take me now. I don't want to do this anymore." And so it just puts on display how weary Moses was. The people were weeping at their tent, the entrances of their tents. They were exhausted. And so I want to point out three things that we see happen to Israel as they grow weary, because I think these are three things that happen to us when we grow weary as well. The first thing that we see with Israel is that the growing weary in the wilderness distorts their memory about God. When we grow weary in our wilderness seasons, that weariness begins to distort our memory about God. An example of this, Numbers 14, verse 3, it says, "Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to die by the sword? Our wives and children will become plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" They are now years, if not decades, into this wilderness wandering, and there is this fear of being attacked by another nation and then being defeated. And in their weariness, they're beginning to believe, did God just bring us out here to die by the sword? Would it not be better if we had gone back to Egypt? Maybe at least there we're not going to be killed. And so their time here is beginning to lead them to forget their own story of how God brought them out in miraculous ways. And would God really bring them out in miraculous ways just to have them killed now? Their memory of what God is doing was distorted. Numbers 11 goes on. It says, "We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna." And so not only is their memory distorted, but their memory of Egypt is distorted. Remember all the food that we had there at no cost? And you're like, guys, it was not at no cost. You were slaves in Egypt. But something happens, and maybe you've been here before, where the hardship of the present leads us to exaggerate the goodness of other seasons. Have you ever found yourself in a place, and it's a season where you're like, you were desperate to get here. Like the season you came out of was horrendous. But then you get here and you realize, oh, this isn't all roses. And suddenly, that season that you were desperate to get out of suddenly starts looking more attractive. And you're like, oh man, it'd be great to go back there. And in those moments, you have to be really honest with yourself and say, no, I was desperate to get out of there. Let my memory not be distorted by the weariness. That's what happens when we grow weary. This kind of reminds me, recently we rewatched Toy Story 4 as we got ready for Toy Story 5. And it reminds me of the character Forky. Everybody remember Forky? So Forky is this little character that Bonnie makes at school out of a spork. She gives him eyes and feet, and she brings him home. And when she gets home with Forky, Forky as a toy comes alive just like all the other toys. However, there's something interesting about Forky, which is that Forky is insistent on getting into the trash. There's something about getting into the trash that he finds comforting and cozy and warm, and he's just constantly trying to get in the trash can. And the whole movie, Woody is trying to get him to understand that he was made for more than a trash can, that Bonnie had made him and loved him. So don't go back to the trash. But I think in our seasons of weariness, we begin to desire places that are much worse than what God actually has for us. We forget who made us and who loves us. And so we begin to believe these places of bondage are actually places of freedom. We forget who we are. The second thing that we see happen to Israel is that their weariness diminishes their trust in God. That as we grow weary in the wilderness, it begins to diminish our trust in God. Numbers 21, verses 4 and 5, it says, "Then they set out from Mount Hor by way of the Red Sea to bypass the land of Eden. But the people became impatient because of the journey. The people spoke against God and Moses. 'Why have you led us up from Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no bread or water, and we detest this wretched food.'" We hear it spoken very plainly here that the people were growing impatient because of the journey. It was making it difficult for them to trust God. They were beginning to wonder, is all of this wilderness leading anywhere? Or are we just going in circles? And I think we feel this as well, especially in seasons of waiting, where we're waiting for something to change. We're waiting for a new season to begin. And in the meantime, it just feels like we're wandering in circles. One of the interesting things as I was doing research for this sermon this week is I was thinking about how when I read these wilderness wanderings, one of the things that I always just assume is that they're just going in circles in the wilderness. They're just weaving all over the place without any clear direction. And so as I'm looking into this to confirm this, I found out, no, actually, they mostly were headed in one direction. There were a couple of times where they had to double back on some things, but it wasn't for no reason. And so even though it feels in the moment like they're going in circles, the truth is they were headed somewhere. Just like in our stories, when we feel like we are going in circles, we just may not be able to see the bigger picture of where we are headed. And so we feel this sense of losing trust in God as these seasons go on and on. I shared last week the story of God leading us to plant Bright City and this long period of uncertainty that we felt. But to give you the more detail of that period, in January of 2017 is when I first began to feel like it was time for a change out of my previous role. And then in June of 2017, I went to my boss at the time and told them to expect a reference call. Essentially, it's kind of like, am I putting in my 2 weeks notice here, whether this goes well or not, And then it wasn't until December of 2017 that we actually had clarity on what was next. And so it was 12 months of just this uncertainty, of wondering, where are we going? Why isn't God clarifying this? Why isn't he giving us direction? And you may be sitting here this morning thinking, I wish mine was only 12 months. It may feel like longer. It may be longer. I think about being a parent with young kids and how they always tell you the days are long and the years are short. And I remember thinking, yeah, but the years feel pretty long right now. I'm ready to get past this season. Or as a student, maybe you're like, when can I be done with school and get on with my life? Actually begin living my life. As a 20-something, I think we find ourselves often asking, what am I supposed to do with my life? God, when are you going to tell me what I'm supposed to do with my life? And all of that wandering can diminish our trust in God. And then the third thing that we see that happens with Israel is that their growing weary damages their perception of God. That when we grow weary in the wilderness, it begins to damage our perception of God. I want to read the verse we read earlier, Numbers 14:3, but draw out a little bit of a different aspect of it. It says, "Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to die by the sword? Our wives and children will become plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" The subtle thing that you see in this verse is that they have come to believe that God is the kind of God who would bring them into the wilderness just to watch them die. Their perception of God, their understanding of God's character has been absolutely damaged by this. They're beginning to wonder, does God take delight in my misery? I think if we're honest with ourselves, we found ourselves in that place where we don't understand why we are still in the desert, why this season isn't over. And eventually we begin to wonder, does God just enjoy watching me suffer? And that weariness creates that damage. And so the question that leads us to then is the second question I asked at the beginning, which is, why do we continue to follow God? If this is the reality, if this is what we're experiencing, why do we continue to follow God in the wilderness? The reason that we continue is because the truth is we are all in the wilderness. We are all in the wilderness. We are all outside of Eden. Last week we talked about how the Israelites in the wilderness was the original wilderness wandering, but in reality, Adam and Eve were driven out of the garden into their own kind of wilderness, plunging the rest of humanity into it with them. Whether we like it or not, we all live in the reality of wilderness, a wilderness of brokenness and pain, where we just wonder, why can't life be easy? Why can't things work out for me? Or things start to work out and then that goes away. It's not permanent. It's because we live in a reality of wilderness. You say, not me, I can escape it. And so we try to escape it through financial abundance. Or I can escape it through entertainment abundance. If I just have enough to entertain me all the time, it can shield me from the thoughts of the reality of a wilderness around me. We escape into intellectual abundance, that I can just think my way out of this, think my way higher than this. That I can escape by an abundance of achievement. I can overcome this. If I just achieve enough, it won't feel like a wilderness. I can escape by a physical fitness abundance or an abundance of health food. All of the things, if I just pour enough into there, then I can escape the wilderness. And the truth is, none of those things are bad things. All of those things are good things, but the truth is, none of us will have all of them. Or we will kill ourselves trying, which is its own kind of wilderness. But none of that can protect us from the desert of relational brokenness. None of that can protect us from medical wilderness that's beyond our control. None of that can protect us from infertility, barren lands. Yes, there may be respite. There may be moments of abundance. There may be opportunities for nourishment, but the heat, the drought, the exhaustion will be back tomorrow. And so I think of this kind of trying to hide the fact that we live in a wilderness with these things. The image that came to mind this morning, and I sent this to our team, was like, can we get this on the screen? But the image that came to mind for me this morning is I think about the ways that we try to cover up the wilderness or pretend like the wilderness isn't there. Does anybody remember the scene from E.T. when they try to hide E.T. behind the stuffed animals? Can we put this on the screen? There's something's out of place here. Something does not look like the rest. E.T. did not look like a cute little stuffed animal. E.T., if we're honest, guys, looked like dried liver. Okay, that's what happens. We try to just hide. We try to pretend like it's not there. But there is no escaping the reality that the wilderness is the reality we live in. And so we continue in following God because it is not about pretending. The answer is not trying to pretend as if the wilderness is not our reality, but because we want to learn to live in alignment with how God instructs us to best navigate it. That God is the one who gives us the instructions on how to best navigate the reality of the wilderness, just as God was trying to do for Israel, to teach them the beauty and the power of utter dependence on him in the midst of the wilderness. God wants us to learn the same thing. And so with the rest of our time, I want to answer the third question, which is how can we remain resilient in the wilderness? What can we learn from Israel about remaining resilient in the wilderness? Well, the first thing that we see Israel do is that Israel formed ways of remembering well. We need to form ways of remembering well. What we see, Israel wrote songs to help them remember what God had done for them. They taught the next generation the things that God had done for them. I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you were teaching, whether it was in a Sunday school class or the church or maybe even in school teaching some subject, but one of the things that happens when you teach others is it builds your own confidence in the things that you're teaching. It reminds you why you believe these things or why they are true. And so they taught the next generation. They would worship in the midst of the journey. The tabernacle, this place of worship, was the center of their lives, and they had rhythms around this. And so this is why in Deuteronomy 7, 18 and 19, it says this: remember well what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all Egypt. You saw with your own eyes the great trials, the signs and wonders, the mighty hand and outstretched arm with which the Lord your God brought you out. This is how we fend off a distorted memory. It's by remembering well what God has done in our lives. This is why we gather each week as a church. This is why we have small groups. Not because we have to, not because God's going to punish us if we don't, but because it is critical to navigating the wilderness well. Being reminded in our moments of uncertainty and doubt of the things that God has done, both in the history of the church, but also in our own lives and the lives of people right around us. The second thing that we see Israel do that helps us remain resilient in the wilderness is regarding daily provision more highly than occasional abundance. Exodus 16:4 says this: then the Lord said to Moses, I am going to rain bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. Oftentimes when it comes to seeing the work of God in our lives, we typically think of the moments of miraculous abundance, the undeniable miracles in our lives. But the truth is that is not what sustains our lives day in and day out. In the wilderness, God did not give the Israelites storehouses of bread to eat so that they know, okay, we've got plenty. The problem with those occasional abundant miracles is you never know when the next one's going to come. And so we actually end up living in more uncertainty, waiting for that next miracle. But instead, God provided just enough for every day. And we ask, why so little? I think the answer is God was teaching them that he was going to show up for them every day. It helps us be resilient in the wilderness when we regard the daily provisions of God above the occasional abundance. Thinking about this and kind of what this looks like, Sharon and I were riding in the car this week, and we were listening to some music, and we were listening to a song by the artist Forrest Frank. I'm sure you're familiar with them, a Christian artist. And Sharon made the comment during this, she was kind of like, I think Forrest Frank really only has one song. One theme, and that is thank you. And, you know, I think that there's some truth to that, honestly, and I don't necessarily love all of his music, but I will be honest with you, I struggle personally with gratitude, especially for the little things. And his many ways of saying thank you have actually been really helpful for me in developing an appreciation for lots of little things that I tend to take for granted, daily provisions that I don't realize I'm so fortunate to have. The third thing that we see Israel do, and that we do to remain resilient in the wilderness, is bringing distress honestly to God. One of the things that we have talked about how often is the people of Israel bringing their complaints to Moses. But then Moses oftentimes takes those complaints to God. We see that in our verse this week, Numbers 11, verse 11. So Moses asked the Lord, "Why have you brought such trouble on your servant? Why are you angry with me? And why do you burden me with all of these people? Where can I get meat to feed all of these people?" And like I said, it gets a little sarcastic. Did I conceive all of these children that I should carry them and take care of them? And in verse 16 and 17, the Lord answers. It says, "The Lord answered Moses, 'Bring me 70 men from Israel, known to you as elders and officers of the people. Take them to the tent of meeting and have them stand there with you. Then I will come down and speak with you there. I will take some of the Spirit who is on you and put the Spirit on them. They will help you bear the burden of the people so that you do not have to bear it by yourself.'" God responds with just incredible grace to Moses in this moment. And yet, so often when the people complain, God responds, quite honestly, in anger. And the question is, what is the difference? Recently, John Mark Comer was talking about this and explained that the difference between the people's complaints and Moses's is that the people took their complaints to Moses. Moses took his complaints to God. Why did that matter? Why did that make such a difference? The best way I know how to describe it is I would say, as a parent, 1,000,000 times over, I would rather one of my kids come directly to me about something that they need than to go to complain to one of their friends about something they don't have. The reason being is coming to me is an expression of trust, an expression of confidence, an expression of trust in my character that I love them, that I'm going to take care of them, an expression of dependence, an expression that they know my character as their father is that I love them and I don't want them to be without something that they need. And I think God wants the same thing from his people. And so in our seasons of wilderness, I want to encourage you, I want to challenge you to bring your distress honestly to God. Sometimes we think we need to protect God from our distress, or that God will be upset with us if we bring him our distress. But honestly, that just misunderstands his heart. He wants you to bring those things to him. He is not threatened by them. Finally, the last thing that we see Israel do, that we can do to remain resilient in the wilderness, is they practice Sabbath. They practice Sabbath, specifically a weekly 24-hour period of stopping, resting, delighting, and worshiping. Sometimes we just need to stick our toes in the sand, even if it's the desert. Deuteronomy 5:15 says this, "Remember that you are a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. This is why the Lord your God has commanded you to keep the Sabbath day." Saying, remember, you are no longer a slave, so don't live like one. I want to challenge your notion of Sabbath this morning. Sabbath is a declaration of freedom. But what's crazy about it is that God has to command them to do this, because it is so difficult for you and I to learn to genuinely live as free people. And so our practice of Sabbath is a declaration that we are no longer a slave. I wanted to share what this looks like for me, just so that you have an idea. Maybe this gives you an imagination of what this could look like for you, because I think we maybe have some distorted ideas of Sabbath. But for me, the Sabbath is a 24-hour period between right after church and noon on Monday. And what that looks like is oftentimes I leave here and I go home and I play video games with my kids. And then we watch a movie. And then I sit on the couch and talk to Sharon. And then maybe we'll grill burgers or go out to dinner with family, go on a walk, play soccer in the backyard, maybe watch another movie. Then Monday morning, get up, kids off to school or camp or whatever it may be, and that's really kind of my quietest time of the week, where I can actually sit down and be still and be alone with my thoughts, process things, pray, reflect, journal, read, exercise, wash my car. It's going to look different for all of us because we find different things life-giving, but I want to challenge you to make this regular weekly declaration of your freedom, because this is how you will remain resilient in the wilderness. It is the declaration that you are not a slave of this world, but you are a child of God. Last week, I wrapped up by communicating how this delivery from Egypt and this journey through the wilderness was a defining event in God's relationship with Israel. And that is true, but it is also a powerful foreshadowing of a future era of God's relationship with his people. I want to share with you something that I think is just incredibly profound, which is the connections between Israel's liberation from Egypt and the work that Jesus does to set us free. We saw how the last plague was the angel of death coming through, but for the families that had the blood of the lamb over the door, they could walk through that doorway into freedom. And we know that Jesus was the lamb who was slain, who gives us the ability to walk out into freedom. But Jesus' first disciples did not see this as freedom. They thought it was the end of the story. Jesus is dead. Israel gets out of Egypt and they're in the wilderness. And we talked about how last week they said, is it because there aren't enough tombs in Egypt that you brought us out here? We're trapped between Egypt and the Red Sea. Just like Jesus trapped in a tomb where hope went to die. And then God, in miraculous provision, rolls back the waves as a foreshadow of rolling away the stone. That there was a hope they could not have anticipated, but now changes everything. And as I said earlier, the truth is we now live in a wilderness of our own. We live between freedom from Egypt and the promised land, the fulfillment of God's kingdom. And so part of us being in the wilderness is this feeling of, I'm not at home. I'm not at home. Something doesn't feel quite right. This isn't an escapist theology, but it's just recognizing we are not yet living in the fullness of God's kingdom, what we might think of as a sort of promised land. But here is where Israel missed it. Israel thought the promised land was the goal. They thought the goal was a place or a set of circumstances. And the truth is, we find ourselves doing that all the time. If I can just get there, or if I can just get beyond, or if I can just get to, then I will have made it. But the truth is, the goal, the promised land, is not a place. It is a presence. Just like Eden is not a place, but a presence that you and I can experience now. Eden was so incredible, not because of the abundance of things there, but because the God who created it all was there. And though we may be in the wilderness, we have access to that presence. The problem is we struggle to live like free people. We struggle to live in the freedom of utter dependence on God. And so what I want to do this morning as we close this time is I just want to invite you to close your eyes, to bow your heads, to take a moment to go to that place of presence with God. Because it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what your circumstances are. Nothing can remove that or take that away from you. Let's take a moment now and connect with Jesus, recognizing that whatever we find ourselves in, he is available.